Firstly, huge thanks again, Graham, for taking the time out of your busy day to come and have a chat with us. It's really kind of positive. It shows that there's a lot of interest around kind of nutrition and growth and maturation, and that really is kind of an important topic that we've had a lot of interest in over the years from students, teachers, and parents. So it's really valuable that we're kind of getting you on here, and we're going to pick your brains and hopefully get some golden nuggets of information out of you, so we can try and then apply that into our program here. Again, the webinar will be recorded and we'll publish it on our School Firefly page. We'll try and answer any questions throughout. Just pop them into the Q&A tab on Zoom, and then we'll save a little bit of time, hopefully at the end as well, to try and mop up any questions that we might have missed. One thing from me then, any students that are listening, I've asked a few of our pupils to log in and have a go, and even parents can have a go at this as well. It's basically, I just want you to try and find one thing throughout the talk that you can physically action after today. So something that you find interest to you, is very personal, that you could help you on your kind of individual journey. So something that you can action. So whether you write that down in a notebook, or somewhere that you can say, right, after today, I'm going to do this. So that's basically it from me. I'll just introduce you then, Graham. You're currently working at Liverpool John Moores, and being a consultant for England Rugby. Lots of other bits. You've got huge wealth in knowledge and experience, and I hope everyone can enjoy what you have to say today. So thanks very much.
No problem at all, and thanks very much for those who are giving up their evenings to come and listen. So what I wanted to do today was give a bit of a tour of what we do with England Rugby when it comes to sport nutrition, and try and translate this as best I can into what everybody can learn from what I try and teach England Rugby. And the reason that I've picked this title picture isn't necessarily to show that there's me with the England Rugby team getting ready to go to a World Cup in Japan. But I think by some means of motivation and inspiration, I don't think there's ever been a better time to work in sport. And the reason that I say that is I once had aspirations of being somebody in the middle of this picture, wearing the white shirt of England, and that never quite happened. But if you do a quick head count on the support staff that England Rugby now have, we have just as many support staff as what we do players. And these were all the people who we took to Japan. So whether it's physiotherapy, medicine, performance analysis, psychology, we took a chef, there's Carlo, a chef, coaches, team communications, a whole wealth of roles are now available in elite sport, and it's a wonderful environment to work in. So as I said, I once had aspirations of being that professional player myself, and I was fortunate that I did have a few years playing professionally. But this bottom pitch here was a major turning point in my life. And this was when I was at university, still wanting to play rugby, and I captained the Great Britain students team on several tours. But it really was a time when a really good professor at Liverpool John Moores, somebody called Professor Don McLaren, lit a flame in me, and that flame still hasn't been put out. And that was how what we can do to the human body by the way we feed it and the way we train it can change everything. And I went to university to try and understand that, I think, how to be a better rugby player myself. And 25 years later, I'm still there. Now I'm a professor myself, and hopefully trying to inspire these young people now into wanting to understand more about the human body. But perhaps a side of my job that you'll be more interested in is how I then try and translate the studies that I'm doing at John Moores University into how can I try and help these athletes get into best physical condition they can be to be an elite athlete. So these are my labs at Liverpool John Moores, and hopefully one day I might see some of you in this building studying for your degrees in sports science. But what makes my group a little bit different than most universities is that my laboratory is the playing field, and where I can, I try and get into the real world to collect the data on the real world athletes. So this is a picture of myself taking what's called a muscle biopsy. So I can take a really small piece of muscle out of athletes, and you can see it really doesn't hurt. Checking his mobile phone while I'm doing it. And in that little piece of muscle, I can then understand how do we best feed an athlete so they've got enough energy to get through that game. And I want to show you today in the next 20 minutes or so how that small piece of muscle dictated how we feed our rugby players in camp with England Rugby. I think this picture probably summarises my job better than any other. And when I was growing up, the gentleman on the left here, Brian Bevan, is a real hero of mine. And Brian still is the all-time leading try scorer for Warrington. But Brian was 5'6" and 55 kilograms. And if we now look at a player in a similar position, somebody like the Chief, Manu Tuilagi, Manu's 6'1" and 110 kilograms. So literally twice the weight. And if you want to put that into any context, you heard that I did once have a career trying to play professional rugby. Well, that's what a modern day player now looks like. So that's Courtney Laws. And you can see that I don't even come up to Courtney's biceps. So these are the type of athletes that we're dealing with. It's not just rugby that I deal with. So if you're not a big rugby fan, don't think that today is all going to be about rugby. These are some of the athletes that I've worked with over the years. So I spent many years heading up nutrition for Everton Football Club, worked with the Lawn Tennis Association with the likes of Johanna Contra. I work with British Ski and Snowboard with the likes of Zoe, and I'm currently working with the European Tour and Ryder Cup teams. And only today, I was having a consultation with Tommy Fleetwood down at the bottom right there about how best to fuel the Ryder Cup next week. And if your aspiration is more for general health, that's another topic that I'm really interested in. And I do a lot of work trying to translate the nutrition science to the general public. And you might have seen some of the TV shows that I've done over the last couple of years trying to explain that to the general public. So that's by means of introduction. But if we want to get into the actual nitty-gritty, let's start now then. So when I write a meal plan for an athlete, regardless of what sport it's in, I build it on 5 things. So I heard at the beginning about taking notes and trying to do something with it. Well, these are probably the 5 key things that we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, well, actually the second, will be the protein needs of the athletes. And I want to explain to you today the protein science, but really take what is quite complex science, show you the science, but really simplify it to a really easy take-home message. I then want to show you the importance that athletes put on carbohydrates and vegetables. So vegetables and then carbohydrates. I then want to cover the hydration needs. So that's 4 things. But before we do anything, I want to cover the energy balance, because I think because of social media, we've kind of lost the key message of nutrition, which is energy balance. And what we mean by energy balance is this relationship between the foods that we eat and the energy that we expend in physical exercise and just everyday living. So I spend a lot of time with my athletes asking them to take pictures of the food. So this is Simon Zebo during my times at Munster Rugby, taking a picture of his food so we could send it to me to do a dietary analysis. The picture on the right is Billy Holland, who at the time was measuring his energy expenditure, wearing this little armband which tracked his total energy expenditure. When I've got a little bit more money, I use a technique called doubly labelled water. Now, this technique costs around about £1,000 per person, so I can't do it too often. But this is one of the Everton ladies football team doing this study for me, where she drinks this special water. And by me collecting her urine then over the course of a week, I know precisely the energy expenditure. And if we look here, the average energy expenditure of a rugby team that we did in this study was about 5,500 calories. So if we think about, the audience today, I would imagine you're somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500, dependent on how active you are. But the average, it only tells us a real small part of the picture. If we look here, one of my players was 5,000 and another one was nearly 7,000. So within the same team. So 7,000 calories is nearly 3 times what a standard person needs to eat. And that's really hard to try and eat 7,000 calories. So we have to put things in place to try and help them, including really high calorie energy shakes. What we also do, because of my ability to work through a university to the elite teams, we can measure precisely the energy expenditure at rest. So why is that interesting to measure the energy expenditure at rest? Well, these are some data that we collected over the last season from Gloucester Rugby. And what you'll see is that the energy expenditure of players is about the same every day. The line is the average, and you can see it doesn't change very much. The shapes of the individual players. But if you look at this particular day that we call game day +1, the day after a match, the resting energy expenditure increases by about 500 calories, and in some players by 1,000 calories. And the reason for that is the demands of the game means that the day after, the body needs more fuel to recover and repair. So we need to really understand the energy demands of the athlete so I can make sure they consume the right amount of food. And we did this recently in the junior athletes at Everton Football Club. So maybe relevant to some of the people in the audience tonight. So you can see here the under 12s, the under 15s and the under 18s. The red line is the energy expenditure of the first team. And you can see that our under 15, some of our 14-year-olds had similar energy expenditure as the first team. And actually our under 18s had a much higher energy expenditure than the first team. And the biggest bit of advice I can give to any athlete and any youth athlete is to really make sure that you're eating enough calories, eating enough food to match your expenditure. Too many youth athletes worry too much about looking like a men's health, women's health model at a young age. And my biggest take-home message is the best thing you can do is to try and eat enough to fuel the demands of your training, your competition, and your growth. Without giving too much away, we do a lot of work with the Lawn Tennis Association, and this exact study I've just shown you, we may or may not have done with quite a high-profile tennis player who may or may not have recently had some high success. And the biggest take-home message I could give, the biggest intervention we've done is increasing food intake to try and help these athletes eat enough. And I can't stress enough, too many, I think, worry too much about body composition at a young age, where my biggest worry is you're eating enough to fuel the energy demands of your day. So at Everton Football Club, we introduced a concept that I call pit stop and grab and grow. So the idea being is when they first got to training, the players got like a muesli bar and a chocolate milk, a quick pit stop. And when they was leaving training, they got a high calorie shake and they picked up something from our protection station that we called grab and grow. So we really tried to big increase in the total amount of food that we're eating in the day. So that's the first thing I wanted to cover, the energy balance. And it's really important, as I've stressed a few times, that as an athlete, we're eating enough fuel, something I don't think people give enough attention to. Okay, so once I've got the energy balance sorted, the next thing I want to concentrate on are the protein needs of athletes. And we know that athletes need about 1.5 grams of protein for every kilogram of their body mass. So if an athlete weighs 100 kilograms, they need 150. If they weigh 50 kilograms, we need about 75 grams. But what's just as important as that is that this protein is spread evenly throughout the day. And why is it important that athletes get a regular supply of protein? Well, to explain that better, I want you to think about what is going on in your muscle all the time. And I want you to think of your muscle as a brick wall. So this shape here is supposed to be your muscle. And within your muscle, think of it as bricks within a brick wall. But what's really interesting about your muscle, and this isn't just youth athletes, this is everybody. At one end of the brick wall, you've got a bricklayer whose job it is to permanently add new bricks. However, at the other end of a brick wall, there's another bricklayer whose job it is to permanently remove bricks. Some of these bricks go to the bricklayer to relay the wall, and some you eliminate by the body. And this is constantly happening. So whereby if today you had a blue brick wall, in around about 100 days, that would be a red brick wall. So if you think about your muscle and you're looking in your arm now, none of them muscle building blocks that are there today will be there in about 100 days' time. It turns over. And that is why if we give the muscle the right stimulus, we can change it into anything we want it to change it. We can change it into the properties of a bodybuilder, or we can change it into the properties of an endurance runner. So these bricks that I talked about are the protein foods that you eat. And that's why we need to give, as an athlete, a regular supply of these protein foods. So it's important that we don't only just give the right amount of them, but we give them regularly throughout the day. And that's why, as an athlete, we can't allow them to wake up in the morning and skip breakfast and rush off with the day. Or you think about your school day. You know, we don't really want you rushing off to school without eating something at breakfast. And that something at breakfast should have a protein content. That could be milk, it could be eggs, could be yogurt. But it's really important that we give some.
Just on that, Graham, apologies to just cut in there.
No, please do.
Just a couple of questions. So with a lot of our kids, we're trying to promote them because they're physically active. I'm constantly asking and reminding them just to bring in some snacks with them into school, so that they're able to kind of fulfill that turnover kind of cycle that you were talking about there. Is there any good suggestions that you might be able to kind of give, which the boys could actually put into their, chuck into their bags quite easily without damaging the parents' fridges too much?
Yeah. So one thing I could do at the end, if you wanted, we have our own like muesli bar recipes that we make ourselves. I'm more than happy to share them. Really simple to make. Forget the parents, the kids can make them themselves. That's really easy. A few simple ingredients, you can make a week's worth in no problem. And you got like a healthy muesli-based snack bar that you can take for a week. I'm a big fan of yogurts. Yeah. So snacking on. Especially you get a bit of Tupperware, get a nice Greek yogurt, which is rich in protein, handful of muesli in it, a bit of fruit. That's a perfect snack to bring with you during the day. So yeah, but there's lots of things to bring, and it's something that we encourage a lot for our youth athletes who are at school to take snacks with them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. The other thing I did have someone asked me recently was about you might come onto this, so it might be a bit premature, about the immediate use of protein shakes straight away into the gym. But like you say, I think social media doesn't help with that and the marketing strategies around it, but that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But what would your kind of advice be in terms of the protein shakes and advising high protein bars and things like that?
Yeah, I probably do cover that a little bit in the next few minutes. If I've not, when I finish a protein section in about 3 or 4 minutes' time, we'll have covered that. I'll make sure I do cover that. In fact, I'll write down on the desk here shakes to make sure I cover it explicitly.
I'll leave you be. Thanks.
Okay. So I think this is a final bit of science that I really showed today, but I think it's important that it tells the protein story. So when I said before, we think about an analogy of a brick wall. The other thing that's really important to remember is that the human body throughout the day builds muscle protein, something we call muscle protein synthesis, and it falls again. And we build it and it falls again. Now, obviously, we want as an athlete to be building more muscle than we're losing. And bear in mind that protein isn't just to get us big and strong, but if you want to get fit or you want a healthy immune system, or all the other things, protein's important for that. And this spike that we see in muscle protein synthesis only happens when the body sees protein. So if you wake up in the morning and you're down here, and as I say, you skip breakfast and your first bit of protein comes at lunch, all this time in the morning, you're in a negative net balance. So you've not got that ability for growth and repair. And what we want to do as an athlete is maximize these net gains and minimize these net losses, which is why I was saying that we need to eat protein when we wake up and then regularly throughout the day. So I put posters like this up at England Rugby around the training ground. So you can see here, this is me reminding the athletes how to get the protein into them. So an omelette at breakfast, maybe a muesli bar at lunch with some nuts and seeds in it, some salmon, some yogurt mid-afternoon, some beef and some yogurt pre-bed. And you may have noticed I've not got a protein shake on there, which may take you towards the question I was asked a second ago. So these are genuinely the posters I put up within England Rugby. I also put posters like this up, showing them what a portion of protein looks like. So you can see that this is for big rugby players. You don't need as much as this. For you, it might be more like 3 eggs, so like a 3-egg omelette in the morning, or it doesn't even need to be a huge chicken breast. It might just be 1 pot of the Greek yogurt for you, 1 pint of milk, some cottage cheese. So these are all great sources of protein. So what is a protein shake? So a protein shake is basically filtered milk. So if you think about, I don't know if you still get taught nursery rhymes, but I certainly remember being told about little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds and whey. So what little Miss Muffet was doing was she was eating both components of milk. So when milk's separated for the cheese manufacturing, it splits into curds and the whey. Now, curds go off to make cheese, and whey used to be a waste product that was given to pigs as pig feed. But it's quite rich in protein. So there's a lot of protein in the milk gets left in the whey. So a few years ago, people realized you can dry that, turn it into a powder and sell it as protein powder. There's nothing magical about it. It's basically filtered milk. I'm a huge believer that you get much more benefit from food than you do any supplement. Now, I'd be lying to you now if I sat here and said rugby players don't take supplements now and again, protein supplements. But they take it when they're in a rush and they've not got perhaps the time to sit down and eat food. If we've got the time to eat food, I prefer people eating food, and then the shakes are perhaps the next best thing. But you also need to remember that they can be really expensive. The cheaper ones can be contaminated with prohibited substances. We've got to worry about that from an anti-doping situation. And don't believe the hype that you see in these magazines that the reason somebody looks like that cover model is because we've drank a couple of shakes. It's filtered milk. It's nothing magical. Okay, so hopefully I've covered the shake side of it. And hopefully now you understand the protein science, that the muscle is permanently turning over and rebuilding. To rebuild, it needs protein-based foods, and we need it regularly throughout the day. And that's it. That's as complex as protein needs to be. I want to move on to something now that you're probably all going to hate me about, which is the vegetables. And we believe passionately at England Rugby that vegetables need to be in every meal of the day, including breakfast. So a good way to get them in at breakfast are things like omelettes. So, we'll make an omelette and add in peppers, tomatoes, spinach, kale, mushrooms, etc., to try and get some vegetables in the morning. And when it comes to vegetables, it's also important that you don't just pick your favorite and eat that 7 times a day. We all know that we should be having 5 to 7 portions of fruits and vegetables a day. And that doesn't mean say, okay, I don't mind tomatoes, so I'll have that 7 times a day. And the reason for that is that we know that the different color of the fruit and vegetables gives us a good indication of why it's good for you. So for example, the red colored fruits and vegetables are often that colour because of lycopene, which has got loads of health benefits, where the orange is because of beta carotene, which has got loads of health benefits. So we're trying to encourage our athletes to what we call eat a rainbow a day. So by the time they've gone to bed, at the end of each day, they've eaten reds, whites, greens, blues, and oranges when it comes to the different vegetables. One way that we do this with England Rugby is by having our smoothie station. So again, what you'll see here is the different colours of the vegetables. We've got our NutriBullets here, one of my smoothie recipes, and the players will come up and they'll add a few different ingredients based on the demands of that day and knock themselves up a fruit smoothie. We also put out fruit juices each day for them. So you can see here, this one is full of apples, berries, chili, things like that. We've got a carrot, orange and ginger one here, and a greens one on the side here. So the players will come up and have a little fruit juice each day to try and get multiple sources of fruit and vegetables into them. And then these are some of the morning overnight oats that we do. So we'll do overnight oats, put into it, chop in berries, strawberries, things like that. So we're always trying to get fruit and vegetables. And even with our salads, we're trying to get different fruit and vegetables into them in a different way. So I think a big mistake that a lot of people make in life is not giving enough attention to the vegetables in each meal. So when you see Owen Farrell at the end of each game doing his team talk, what he is actually saying is you need to eat enough fruit and veg now if you want to recover properly. And I know that because I know Owen well, and do I look like the type of person who would lie to you? Okay. The next section I wanted to cover is probably the most controversial section, which is the carbohydrate needs of athletes. And the reason that this is controversial is because for some reason, there's a growing trend at the moment that athletes don't need carbohydrates and that athletes fuel performances on high-fat diets. And I'm not sure why this has become popular, but I just want to promise you that athletes fuel performance on high carbohydrate diets. Doesn't mean they eat a high carbohydrate diet every day of their life, because some days they might not be training too hard, but certainly on days that they're training hard and in the build up to game, I can guarantee you that they fuel this performance on carbohydrates. And the reason for that is twofold. One, the body is unable to store a lot of carbohydrate. So this is an interesting fact that you may, if you don't know, it's worth writing down. No matter how much carbohydrate we eat, we can only store enough in the human body for about 60 to 70 minutes of high intensity exercise. That's it. We have enough fat stored in the body to run all week. But when it comes to carbohydrate, we can only store enough for 60 to 70 minutes of high intensity exercise. A second key fact is the body can only fuel high intensity exercise with carbohydrate. So you can jog all day on our body's fat stores. But if you want to do the high intensity efforts in a game like football and rugby, this has to be fueled by carbohydrate. And to summarize this well, this was a study that was done a few years ago now in Juventus football. And what you can see here is 5 of the players started the game with a full muscle carbohydrate store. 4 started the game only half full. By the end of the game, them who started only half full had completely run out, but those who started full still just had about 10% left in. The interesting thing is, look at the distance covered in the second half between the two groups. The group who started with a lower carbohydrate covered nearly 2 kilometers less in the game than those who started with high carbohydrate. And the vast majority of the second half was spent walking in the group that had run out of carbohydrate. So think about carbohydrates as fuel for the car. So if you think about protein as bricks for a wall, carbohydrate is a fuel for your car. And when a car runs out of petrol, it stops. And when your muscle runs out of carbohydrate, it stops. But even if it doesn't stop dead, it stops you getting into top gear. So I wanted to look at this in rugby players to check whether it was the same as in footballers. So this is that study I showed you right at the beginning, where I'm getting ready to take a muscle biopsy now out of this rugby player before and after the game. And if you wonder what a muscle biopsy looks like, that's how much muscle we get out. It's about the size of a grain of rice, that's all. And then our players go and play a full game of rugby. And just like the football study, the group that started with a lower carbohydrate were running out of energy at the end of a game and were spending more of a game walking. So in sports like football and rugby, we know that carbohydrate is king. So this is what I do with my rugby players. I tell them about what foods are high in carbohydrates. So I put posters like this up around the training ground. And I teach them to have carbohydrates with each meal, but the amount depends on how hard that training day is. So I teach them to have either 1, 2, or 3 portions. One portion being what I would call a red meal, so a low carbohydrate meal, 2 portions amber and 3 green. So you can see we're never very low, but on some days we're a bit lower. And when my players get to the dining hall, so this is a picture within England Rugby's training camp, they will get to this magnetic blackboard, and you can see that on a Monday, when we've got a light training day, they see lots of red magnets. So they're just having 1 portion of carbohydrate in these meals. Tuesday, you can see that they'll be having 2. And Wednesday, which is our hard training day, they have 2 around training and then ease off a little bit. Friday is the day before match day. So Friday, you can see that they're having big portions of carbohydrate all day. So the muscle is fully loaded, ready to go. So I think the take-home message for carbohydrate for you is that think about it like fuel for a car. And when we need lots of fuel, we need lots of it. And when we maybe don't need as much fuel, we can eat a little bit less of it. But believe me, elite athletes, rugby and football players, fuel their performance on carbohydrate-based foods such as potatoes, rice, breads and pastas. Do I see you've got a question there?
Yeah, I have just a short one. So how you kind of planned your week out through those color coding, it's really interesting because we've hopefully done something similar at the school. We have a really long games afternoon on a Wednesday where the boys have opportunities to typically take part in kind of an hour and a half to up to 2 hours of activity. And then that might then carry over on to the next day. They might have, say, a gym session. Yeah. And then on the Friday, they might actually have a team run in preparation for the fixture on Saturday. So in terms of their kind of their feeding strategies or their nutrition strategies, is it fair then to say that they do actually need to be considering that at home the night before to bring things in, realizing that they've got more exercise on one day in comparison to the next?
Without doubt. So on the days when you've got a big training day, or if it's the day before competition, be making an extra effort to eat a bit more carbohydrate. Now that can be in the form of fruit as snacks between meals. It can be the type of muesli bars we were talking about before. It can be just an awareness of having that little bit more pasta. So they might bring with them like a little pasta pot that's got a little bit of a tomato sauce based in it, and a bit of tuna or something, and just snack on something like that. But without doubt, if you've got long training days, because as I said, remember, you could have eaten perfectly so your muscles fully loaded with carbohydrate. If you train hard and then you've got to go hard again the day after, your muscle's now empty. The only way to fill it back up is to give it some carbohydrate. And if it's not, we're starting the next session with the tank half full, which means we'll fatigue prematurely.
Great, thanks, Graham.
Okay, the final section is a real simple one, which is dehydration. And quite simply put, dehydration impairs performance. I could almost stop there. If you're dehydrated, your performance will be impaired. So we need you to be drinking regularly throughout the day. And it doesn't need to be sports drinks and things like that. Good old-fashioned tap water is more than adequate to keep us hydrated. But actually having your water bottle with you, making sure it's full, keeping it chilled, which will help you to drink it a little bit more, and just an awareness that we should be drinking more, and actually that your urine should be clear and odorless. And if it's not, if you've got stinky yellow wheeze, the chances are you're a little bit dehydrated and we need to be drinking more. We think it's so important at England Rugby that what we do now and again is get my team into the training barn, and we measure each individual player's sweat rate and the sweat sodium losses. So we know how much a player needs to be drinking during exercise so they don't get dehydrated. We think it's so important that the team come to my labs at Liverpool John Moores, where we get them into my environment chambers, and I can also then check how their sweat rate is in hot conditions. So this was really important for us to do prior to Japan, because obviously Japan was going to be a lot more hot and humid than we were used to. And by identifying which were our bigger sweat players, we could then put specific strategies in place. Prior to the World Cup in Japan, we went over to Treviso in Italy to test these regimes, as well as doing heat acclimation training to get our players used to the heat, where I was out each day with my little wet bulb temperature monitor to check the temperature, check the humidity, and then make sure that each player got the specific amount of fuel. You can see that a little green mark on this bottle here, which differentiates the different bottles for different players, to make sure that each player is rehydrating according to their own needs. And I'll take you into the dressing rooms at Twickenham, behind the scenes, and please don't let little bits of privileged information like this go too wide on social media. But if you wonder what we have on match day, you can see it's good old-fashioned water. So if you're thinking that you need to be rushing out buying the expensive sports drinks, the main drink that we have is good old-fashioned water. If we can keep hydrated with water, we are 90% of the way there. What is our secret weapon? Well, sometimes on hot days, the players will have an ice slurry. So like you, probably like a slush puppy, we do something similar to give them something nice and chilled, but we do it on an industrial basis. So there's myself with a big stick blender, just ice water, a little bit of flavour, a little bit of salt in there to replace the electrolytes that are lost. And that is our hydration strategy, which I can summarise as stay hydrated, start exercise hydrated, take water on board during exercise, rehydrate at the end, and if it's a hot day, knock yourself up a nice slurry and be nice and happy. So my take-home message is that sport nutrition is actually quite simple. It's probably been overcomplicated by people trying to sell products, where in reality, all we need to do is match energy intake and expenditure. I put in brackets for or change it. If we're trying to put weight on somebody, we need to get our intake higher than the expenditure. We need quality proteins regularly throughout the day, whether that's plant or animal-based proteins. We need them regularly throughout the day at about 1.5 grams of protein for every kilogram of your body weight. We need to eat quality carbohydrates to fuel your training and your games, so your potatoes, rice, and pastas. When we need lots of energy, we need to eat more of them. And when we need a bit less energy, when you may be having rest days or maybe having a week off, we need to eat a bit less of them. We need loads of vegetables. Most people don't eat anywhere near enough vegetables, and we need to stay hydrated. And if we do all that, then we're doing everything we can to maximize not only our match day performance, but our long-term health. So on that note, I think that leaves us around about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm more than happy now to answer any questions that anyone may have in the chat or may have previously posed that I've not answered in the presentation.
Well, thanks, Graham. I'll start you off with a question I had. It was via email from one of the parents, and it was actually around protein intake with picky eaters that don't eat much meat, and they won't have any of the kind of nuts bars or shakes. What would your suggestion be for that kind of that group of people?
So yeah, the picky eaters is an interesting one, and we do deal with it. The first thing I would say is, if we can encourage people to try things, even small amounts, because our taste buds do change, and something that you may not like 1 month, you may like the next. The second thing I would say is, if you've got aspirations to be an elite athlete, just remember that sometimes the foods that we eat are just, well, not sometimes, they're just as important as the training that you do. And if you think that you literally are what you eat, so you think about that, putting bricks into a wall, if you're not putting any bricks into a wall, we're not going to get out of the training what you want. Things to try. I'm a massive fan of eggs. So if people like eggs, great. We used to think that eggs were problematic from cholesterol, and I think that hypothesis has pretty much been put to bed now. Your liver basically dictates your cholesterol. So I think if we're happy with eggs, is a good thing. I'm a big fan of yogurts and milk and dairy, again, and cheese and things like that. But then obviously there's plant-based proteins such as beans and lentils and pulses and all things like that. If it's the texture of meat people don't like, well, then we can maybe experiment with things like soya and corn and the meat-free alternates. But the key thing will be to say, right, what do we weigh roughly? 60 kilos. We need 90 grams. That's only really 420-something gram hits in the day. How are we going to get them 420-something gram hits in the day? And there's a variety of ways that we can do that.
Good, thank you. So someone's made a good point on the Q&A. We have a no nuts policy in our school. So your kind of point that you mentioned about the dairy products, some milk, yogurts, that kind of thing, that could kind of fit into this environment very easily. One of the other ones is around a bedtime snack. So what are your views on kind of chocolate milk before bed? And do you think the ratio of 4:1 carbs to protein is roughly around the right ratio?
Okay, so two good questions. I'm a big fan of milk pre-bed. What you find when you study sport nutrition now is, I could almost summarize it as, my gran was right and I should have listened to her. God bless her. Like glass of milk pre-bed, eat more vegetables, all the stuff, cook whole ingredient, single ingredient foods, all the different things that gran used to do. She probably should have been a sport nutritionist without knowing it, apart from her obsession with a fry up. So maybe ignore the fry up, and my gran had it pretty much nailed. The chocolate milk can be a little bit high in sugar at times, and we just want to be aware of that from a dental perspective, if we're going to have it after we brush our teeth. But normal milk, I'm a massive fan of. What I'm also a massive fan of, if people want a little bit of flavour, is get yourself a little stick blender. I think it's about 5 of these days from Tesco's. And if you want, into a pot, some milk, you're going to thicken it up a little bit, a bit of Greek yogurt, a few frozen blueberries, raspberries, and knock yourself up a little fruit smoothie pre-bed. There'll be just as much protein in that as any protein shake. It'll be far better for you, and it follows my philosophy of a food first approach, but where we can get our nutrition in food, we always should.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're trying to promote that here as well. Always trying to go for those foods before the powders and the kind of the magic things. But we've got a couple more questions. One of them is around the carbohydrate. Does it matter too much what that specific carbohydrate is? So some suggestions are pasta, brown rice, and bread, or is it just trying to get a source of carbs in to keep those energy balances high?
A bit of both, really.
Yeah.
We know that the whole grains, the things like that, got a bit of a higher fiber content. So from a long-term health perspective, we would probably want more of them foods than the others. Having said that, I don't know what you think. For me, brown rice tastes like feet, and it's not something I would enjoy eating. And we can't forget that eating should be a pleasurable experience. So basmati rice is a great compromise between brown rice and and my white rice. When it gets nearer to game time, there's an argument to be made for the more faster digestive ones, like your white rice and your white pastas and things like that. So if most of the time we could choose the whole grains and things like that, but the actual white rice, white breads and things like that come back out within England Rugby on the Friday to help us load up better for the game on Saturday.
Okay, good. So a good mixture in there.
A mixture, yeah. You know, and like you say, you know, find what you enjoy.
Make it tasty.
Yeah, if we're eating healthily and we're increasing our vegetable intake, we've got lean proteins, we're eating loads of veg, and you much prefer white bread to brown bread, well, don't lose a minute's sleep over it. In the grand scheme of it, you know, if you want to do everything absolutely spot on, well, then let's make that switch. But the key thing for me is that we should enjoy that process of eating. You know, it's one of our few pleasures in life, isn't it? You know, it's like you want to impress somebody, you take them on a first date. It's normally to a restaurant, isn't it? Because it's a you know, pleasurable. First place I took my wife was to a Chinese. So
to make or break.
Well, that's because I'm tight and it was cheap. But you know what I mean? It should be an enjoyable experience. And please don't let anyone come away from here thinking that eating food shouldn't be a pleasurable experience.
Good. Yeah. No, thank you. One of these is super specific to kind of the environment we're in, and it might translate across to other schools as well in terms of the boarding environment and kind of eating disorders. How would you go around discussing energy balance without focusing too much on, you know, calories and deficits and trying to keep that in the conversation positive?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, you know, it's a very sensitive, and it's hard to give generic advice here. But the key thing is that, as I tried to emphasize early on, the key to performance, without doubt, is enough fuel. And under fuel, if we turn it from a performance perspective, I think a lot of people think that eating less will help them from a performance perspective because maybe they've seen people looking super lean. What people forget is that when you look at, you know, I've got a big gripe against some of these fitness magazines. You've probably heard me dismiss them 2 or 3 times today. And that's because then people on the cover have dieted down for about 8 weeks to look like that. And on the day of that photo shoot, they would not have the energy to actually walk into the gym, never mind lift the weights that they're going to be doing when we get there. And that's not what you look like to be healthy. You know, if I could show you a picture of our rugby team with the tops off, they don't look like Men's Health cover models, but the athletes fully fueled and ready to go. So I think the message is that food is fuel. And if we want to fuel that well, we've got to eat it. And I think if we can get that message across, then hopefully we would stop young people from trying to underfuel to look like what they think an athlete looks like.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And again, I think social media and things like that, it doesn't necessarily help. But yeah, again, another conversation. In terms of supermarkets, so when we're going with our parents shopping, or whether it's the parents doing the shopping, are there any have you got any kind of good cheat codes or little tricks to help steer people towards the healthier kind of products rather than those that are advertised as, you know, high protein, or is it better just to make things from home from scratch?
I think that's a great thing, what you just said then. Just a rule of thumb, if you can identify everything on your plate, the chances are it's a healthy plate. So if you can see a piece of salmon, you know, a couple of sweet potatoes, some broccoli, and some carrots, we've got a fair chance we know that's pretty good. If you can't identify what's on your plate, unless you've made it yourself and you know what you put into it, then there's a first start. So I think that's a starting point. I think you've also got to remember that supermarkets are designed to make you buy what you don't want to buy. When you actually look into the science of supermarket design, it's actually fascinating. So it's little things like the vegetables will always come first in a supermarket. And why is that? And that's because most of us go into a supermarket with good intentions. So they hit you with it at that point. If the vegetables are at the end by the time you put the pop, crisp and beers in, chances are you're not going to put your fruit and veg in at the end. So that's in first. The things that they want you to buy are always at eye level, and you pay more to be at that end of aisle, the temptation bit. So just an awareness of when you go around the supermarket, asking yourself, what do I really want? And taking a shopping list is a good thing, and sticking to it. So pre-plan, this is what I want. I want plenty of veg. I want some lean fish, some white fish, some salmon. I want some good carbohydrate sources, etc., etc. And then I think we'll go pretty well. But just remember that they pay millions to design supermarkets to tempt you to get. It's like the milk will always be back right normally, and that's because most people want milk, so you've got to walk past everything else to get to it.
No, they get you. They do. Before we get to the supermarket then, and we're flicking through our recipe books, have you got any good suggestions for everyone listening about a good recipe book which would be good to take a flick through, or any good resources we can direct people towards?
Well, I've done about 60 of these school talks, and that's the first one that anyone said, what is a good sport nutrition recipe book? And you've stumped me, because I tend to have my own, but my own recipes that I give out. There's a couple of really good Instagram accounts. One's called Food Flickr, and the other one is an app called Hexis, Hexis, and they put loads of really good sport-specific recipes on. I actually not convinced there's any brilliant book. I'll tell you what I can plug. James Haskell has done a book, the former England rugby player, in collaboration with Omar Messian. And Omar Messian is one of the best sports chefs out there. He worked at England rugby, and now he's a head chef for England football. So it's basically Omar's recipe book with James Haskell pinching a few quid off him, which he's very good at doing, if you know Hask. Sorry, Hask, if you ever see a copy of this. But having said that, I'm not that sorry, because I've just plugged your book. That will be a really good one. So Omar and James Haskell. All
right, brilliant. Yeah, thanks very much. Probably got time for maybe one last one. And those that we haven't managed to answer, I will try and get some answers kind of published on our website as well. Just then before a match or a race day, assuming this may be from a runner or an endurance athlete, what would your suggestions be in terms of carb loading and that kind of topic?
Yeah, so the textbooks will suggest about 10 grams of carbs per kilogram body weight. I think that's too much the day before. I find, unless you're really going for a marathon performance or something like that, but it's just a standard performance, we tend to aim at nearer to 6 grams per kilogram body weight the day before. We then try and have a good carbohydrate breakfast, and then the pre-match meal, which if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff and we're talking about lunchtime, we normally have that pretty light, because nobody likes to feel too heavy going into a game. So our key day is the day before, and then breakfast, and then we go a little bit lighter after that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. Last one then. Should we use full fat milk? And any particular preferences with the milk?
A little bit of that depends on energy balance. When you strip out full fat to skimmed or semi-skimmed, all you're really doing is removing the fat. So for a young person who's often trying to get more energy into them, then I like full fat milk. And anyone who's trying to gain weight, it's an easier way to do it. If you're on energy balance and you're looking for an easy way to reduce calories a little bit, then sure, switch down to the lower alternates. You don't strip out the calcium and you don't strip out the protein. You're just stripping out the fat. So we're not losing anything major by doing it. But I also think fats, natural fats found in things like milk, things like that, has probably been badly demonized. So I don't see any harm in people having them if it helps to maintain your overall balance.
Okay.
So I guess you can summarize that as it depends.
It depends, yeah. Whichever tastes the best. I think it's the gold top.
I think that's the other one. If anyone can tolerate skim milk on a Weetabix, they're better than me.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, yeah, Graham, thanks again for your time and for answering those questions and for the presentation. It's been really, really insightful. I've certainly managed to get a couple of pages of notes down, and I'll be re-watching it again. Reminder to everyone listening, we're going to put the talk up on our school Firefly page. So the students will have access to that. So you might have to ask them to log on for you to view that again in the future. Thank you very much. And we hopefully will be hosting some more talks like this again in the future.